Hi everyone and welcome to a new lesson and video demonstration about realistic oil painting. In this video this time I'm going to paint some bamboo along some stones sitting in water, which again was a commission. It is sized 40 by 80 centimeters and I will guide you along what I did and what you can do, what you should avoid to do, and I will try to give you all the knowledge that you will need to know to make something like that yourself. And so just let's start. In the very beginning, as with any artwork I'd say, you'll need to make your initial design. I made this up on Photoshop like a mock-up, and once my client agrees to the design that I had in mind, I can start sketching it on the canvas. If you freehand it after the initial design, or if you trace it to your surface you're working on, or if you use a projector or an LCD beamer or whatever tool you use to get the project to your actual working surface, take whatever you want to use. I myself used an LCD beamer to project it on large scale. I of course could have freehanded, but it saves so much time when you use a tool for it and you get even cleaner lines. So especially when you're working on a canvas and you want to use a pencil or a graphite pencil to make the sketches and you make the wrong line and you cannot really erase it that well on a canvas, which will have you ended up in smudging lines, which is something I normally would not want to have on my working surface. So the tracing method is a great way to go. And yes, I know some people don't really like tracing and call it cheating, but from my perspective, it is as much cheating as using a calculator is for an accountant, for example. So for me, this is just a tool which saves me time, and do whatever you would like to do. If you don't want to trace it, just freehand it. If you feel the same about tracing, then you're totally fine doing it. When my initial sketch was done, I started off with acrylic paints. I normally don't really work that often in acrylic paints, beside the acrylic pouring of course, because of the drying time. They dry pretty quickly and it always feels like stressing me out too much in making a smooth finish. I of course know some methods of extending the drying time by spraying a mist of dust with my airbrush, so water over it, but it's just not what I want to do all the time. So I really don't work that often in acrylics, but they come really handy when it comes to a base layer paint. And this is actually what I'm doing here. So I take the colors that I need. Basically this is more or less roughly the tones that I need. I really don't care so much about the correct color at this stage of the painting, more like the values, so that I have areas that are dark enough and areas that are light enough. Whatever you do in this stage does not affect so much the end result. So even if your color is off or that your shading is not completely correct, it is not so much of a deal. The base layer paint is more or less just a guideline for you and to have the canvas covered. And after all, using this acrylic paint goes a lot faster as a base layer than using oil paints. And it's also cheaper, of course. The additional plus, if you have finished your base layer, you will see immediately which areas you need to tweak on. So if your design really works in larger scale on a painting, or if you have to alter some stages, if you need to add something there or remove something there, this is really easily done in a base layer paint. And even if you have to paint over something and it is a bit see-through, what acrylics oftentimes are, it is not such of a deal as well, because the oil paint more or less is opaque and will cover every mistake that you did on the go for the base layer. And this is actually the reason and secret what I did here. The application of the base layer really went quickly. It was about, I think, 45 minutes until everything was done, which is pretty cool, I think. And the good thing as well, it does not really need to dry, because on such a thin layer of acrylic paints it just dries instantly and I could jump into oils right away. If you would have done the base layer in oil colors, which you can do of course as well, just thin it down with some paint thinner or liquid or whatever you used to use and make the base layer as well. But of course this will have a much longer drying time and you will have to knead it right, because otherwise you will smudge the paints and you get a muddy color, which I guess you normally want to avoid. When it comes to the oil colors itself, I picked the ones that I had, of course, and the colors that I want to see in my final result. Of course, you will never have the exact same color that you had in the reference photo, which is really not a problem. It is more important for the viewer that you have the lights and the darks, so your values, in correct tones, so that your values, so the darks, are as dark enough and the highlights are as light enough. This is way more important than having the correct same color, and this is something I think I tell in every realistic video that I make, because this is really the key factor. Even if your color is completely off, but your values are right, it will be way less obvious to the viewer in the end than having the perfect color, but your shades are off, so your values are off. If you stay in the middle ranges, so avoid any too dark or too light areas, everything is going to look flat. And even more important when it comes to portraits and such, you really need these darks and these light areas to have it look 3D, to make it popping out of the canvas, so to speak. Another advantage when you have a base layer of paint applied to your canvas, you don't really need so much of the oil paints afterwards. If there was no base layer, you would of course need more paint to cover the entire canvas and to fill up all the bumps of the canvas that nothing of the fabric is showing through. So this is done by the acrylics already. So it will be really enough to have a tiny amount of the oil colors, and I really did not need that much of them. Because, you know, oil colors, especially artist grade oil colors, are expensive. So wherever you can save on, it's a good thing, I guess. And when it comes to the final stages, you have different ways of approaching it. You can continue the glazing method, so thinning down your paints with liquid, for example, and glaze over the areas until you have the value and the color tone that you want to achieve. And you can do this as often as you want. Just let everything dry between each layer and glaze over, glaze over, glaze over, until you have the look that you want to achieve. You can also use the dry brushing method, which more or less I used here. This is just the oil paints and a dry brush, and then you more or less spread the pigments over the already painted canvas. This allows you to have a really thin layer applied, and you can change the values on the go. So if we have really large amount of paint, which some artists also want to have, and this is great, it just takes very much more time to dry, you're going to have a hard time blending in smoothly, if this is something you want to achieve in the end, of course. Because the more paint you have, the more paint you will need to make another color tone, and so on and so on and so on. If you only have a very thin coat of the pigment applied to your canvas just to have everything covered and opaque, it is really easy to change the color tones as well by just adding a tiny bit of the other color to it and smudge it around. If you like the smooth look on an oil painting, or if you want to see brush strokes or whatsoever effect in an oil painting, this is totally up to you. I personally love the smooth transitions. Sometimes I also like to have structure and have my brush stroke see-through. This changes from subject to subject and is again something that is totally up to you, whatever your taste is actually. And for the entire last steps of this painting, I did this glazing and dry brushing method until I had a look that I really enjoyed looking at. And there will be times that you need to step back from your painting a couple of minutes, just do something else, whatever else, and go back, have a look at your painting. Just to see if there are areas that stand out too much, which do not look right, where the values are off, so some highlights are probably too light or some areas are too dark. And oftentimes it's just the too light scenario than the too dark scenario. Because we artists, just be honest, we are always afraid applying too dark areas, too dark shadows, because we think we can ruin something. But oftentimes it's just the fear of getting darker that is preventing our artwork from looking even more realistically. So don't be afraid of the dark. And just a small tip when it comes to the color mixing itself. I oftentimes do mix my colors on the canvas itself, so not really before I apply it, especially on these nature-related topics. When it comes to portrait paintings, where the color is a bit more important, I'd say, I do pre-mix my colors before I apply to the canvas, but especially here, I oftentimes mixed it directly on the bamboo, for example, or in the water area. Something that you can keep in mind when you mix your colors, especially when it comes to greens, Most people tend to use pure white, so titanium white, to lighten up the colors, which of course works, but it also changes the color itself. So if I would apply a titanium white pigment to a green, it gets a bit like a mint green, which oftentimes does not really look like nature anymore. So if you want to highlight your greens on a realistic nature painting, I would recommend using a yellow, because the yellow lightens up the green and it looks much more realistically. Same with a red. Although the reds are going to shift into the orange spectrum, it is going to look more realistically when you highlight your reds with a yellow than it does by using white, because the white makes it pink, and pink is again a color that nature does not really show that often, except for flowers, for example. So this is something you can play around with. Another question that might arise is why I painted the water green. Water itself do not really have a color at all. It most of times reflects the scenario which is sitting on top of the water. So if you are outside in a landscape and you look at a lake, it will most of times reflect the sky. So if you have a pretty blue sky with no clouds whatsoever, the water will be bluish. Much darker than the sky itself, but bluish. If you have clouds attached, you will see these clouds in a darker tone as well in the lake. And if the water is not as deep, you will also see parts of the ground underneath the water. So this is something that you need to keep in mind. Whatever is sitting on top of the water will reflect inside of the water and give it more or less the color itself. As my entire painting here is on the greenish scale, of course the water needs to be greenish as well. I could have changed it on some areas to a bit more grayish bluish tone, but it wouldn't have looked as pretty in the total design of the painting, I'd say. But again, you can experiment with this look of the water yourself. You can paint it blue if you like, and if you don't like it in the end, you can just pick a green color and thin it down with liquid and glaze over, and you will shift it towards the green. So this is something you can do with the oil colors, which is really, really beautiful, and yeah, it saves you a lot of stress, especially when it comes to color. I myself was horrified using oil colors for ages. I just thought it was too much for me, and I told this in some videos before as well. So if you're transitioning from whatsoever medium and want to give oils a try, you can of course start playing with the oils in just black and white monochromatic spectrum. This will save you on paints because you only need these two paints, and you can try shading and everything just in black and white, which is a challenge in itself. And before you switch over to using colored paints from the start, you can just try the glazing method. And I made a video about the glazing as well on my channel, and a very simple project. But it has become one of my most famous videos since I uploaded it, which is great. And in this video I'm going to show you the glazing method in a bit more detail. So when you have, for example, this landscape here, just in black and white, you can just use the greens and glaze over it. It will be super pretty, it will be super easy, and it takes a bit of the fear using colored color. This also works in acrylics, of course, but from my perspective, what I have experienced so far, most people are not that much afraid of using acrylics than they are using oil colors. Yes, and after all this rambling, we are actually finished with this piece. And I really hope you like the end result. The final step after everything is dried is the vanishing process, which is a really, really satisfying one. Because all these oil colors, especially the darker ones, dry a bit matte. So the darker the oil color, the more matte it is going to dry. And this varnish is going to bring everything back to life and make the colors vibrant again. And it is basically the final step to seal your painting and have it ready to be shipped or handed over to your client. So I think this varnishing process is the most satisfying thing for an artist that they can have. I'm going to show you the varnish process, how it looks in the very end, so you can see the difference between the unvarnished and the varnished project. And other than that, I really hope you liked this video and demonstration, and perhaps I could take away some of the fear that you have on using oil paints. So if you liked what I did, if you liked the result, please give me a thumbs up. And if there are any questions that I did not answer here in this video, please feel free to leave me in the comments. I will be happy to answer them. If this was one of the first videos that you've seen of mine, please make sure to subscribe to my channel as well and hit the bell icon to not miss out on any of my new videos. And especially for the realism, I do have a separate playlists, or I do have playlists for each area that I'm working on in arts, because I'm pretty versatile there. Yeah, just have a look at some of my other videos, and if you want to get in touch with me, my social media is linked below in the video description, as well as the materials that I've used. So, as always, thank you so much for your time, thank you so much for watching, and other than that, I hope to see you in my next videos. Have a great day, bye bye!